Vonya Womack will present rights violations against arbitrarily incarcerated women following the 2016 failed coup attempt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm Vonya Womack. I'm the Executive Director of Refugees Unknown, Stories Untold, located in Pennsylvania. We collect refugee stories, and we're concentrating currently on the Turkish purge, creating a digital database. We also partner in empowerment projects and do human rights advocacy for refugees that are fleeing tyrannical regimes. I was faculty at the Cabrini University in Pennsylvania for about 10 years, and prior to that I worked in business. Currently I also teach adjunct at Villanova University and at Cedar Crest College in economics, as well as refugees and forced migration. So I want to present to you today a study that's going to show you how important these stories are. This story is very different, the study is very different than the ones that have been done, simply because this is data from the ground. So these are things that have been collected on the ground in Turkey, and then they have been worked through with people here in the United States as well. So over the last 4 years, I've been traveling to Greece, Scandinavia, Germany, and many other places throughout the United States, you could say, collecting stories like these that are included in this study that I'm going to share with you. This study is of particular importance, as I mentioned, because it was conducted on the ground in Turkey of women in Turkish prisons and the violations they experience. So I'm going to give you some information here that's very well known to many of you, but I know that we have students in the room, and was mentioned before by Sophia, is that you may not have a lot of the background on this. So I'm going to make sure that I put that in there for you as well. So the state of emergency was declared in July 20, 2016, and this was immediately following the attempted coup, which was on July 15. It remained in effect until July 19 of 2018, and during this period, it lasted a little more than 2 years. There were 32 decrees with the force of law were issued. 5 more were entered into force in the following days. And the official end of the state of emergency decrees, there were a total of 133,000 public officials that were dismissed, and that was with the decisions of the Council of Judges and the prosecutors, as well as the aforementioned KHKs. Of the dismissed civil servants, there were over 110,000 that were men, and over 23,000 that were women. So this mass purge against these public officials was only one aspect of the persecution and the human rights violations that amounted to a social genocide. Investigations were launched over 2 million people on the grounds of membership that they were in a terrorist organization, as you heard some other people talk before. Now, as a result of these investigations, over 500,000 people were imprisoned or they were convicted. So the Turkish Statistical Institute, Turkstat, according to their data, the number of female prisoners and convicts was 3,343 in 2011 and over 10,000 in 2020. That's a huge increase. So what does this study focus on? It focuses on the rights violations that were experienced by female prisoners and convicts, especially after 2016. There were 2 main arms of this study. The first of these arms was to determine the rights violations that were experienced in prisons by women who have been in prison for political reasons over the last decade. And the way that this was done was through 180 questionnaires and 9 semi-structured interviews. So the second aim or arm of this study is to record the hardships and the tribulations that were experienced by these people in these prisons. Now, 91% of the participants were arrested during the state of emergency, and these prison sentences ranged from 6 years and 3 months to aggravated life imprisonment. It is the emergency decree that paved the way for serious rights violations by the political prisoners. And some examples of these rights being violated are, here's a participant, she's a 26-year-old woman who was primary school dropout, stated that she was harassed by the guards while being transferred from her prison to another prison. Another participant, a 27-year-old literature teacher from Izmir province, told that the toilets in her prison, where she was incarcerated, were clogged. The prison administrator ignored the problem, and as a result, political prisoners had to use a part of the courtyard for their toilet needs with shredded pieces of newspapers. Another woman, 8 months pregnant, was confined with her 2 sons, ages 4 and 6, in a 2-square-meter cell called a coffin with no windows. Now, one of the interviews in this study was arrested just because her spouse was under arrest. And that example just in itself reveals how the boundaries of law have become ambiguous. Now, many of the participants in the study were accused of being members, of course, of the armed terrorist organization, and many of you know why, but I want to make sure that you students in the room really know why. So I'm going to tell you, where are the students? Okay. Gotcha. So imagine this, if you had a legal bank account, you worked in an educational institution that was affiliated with the Ministry of Education or National Education, or you sent your kids to this educational institution, or because you downloaded a communication app called Bylock on their phones, you can think of WhatsApp. You know, these are all things that cause these women that I'm talking about in this study to be sent to prison. So prison, power, and total institutions. I always feel like I have to give some kind of credit to the philosophers. So the philosophers of this study, they looked at these 3 different people. I'm just going to give you just a quick brief about who they are. So in the research, it discusses Foucault's disciplinary power, Engman's camp and exception, and Irving Goffman's total institutions. So who are these people? Foucault dealt with the transformation in power structures and forms within the framework of the concepts of absolute power, disciplinary power, and biopolitics and biopower. So these concepts reveal the ways in which political authority uses power and its spheres of influence, looking at it from a historical perspective. Okay, Amigan, the political power has to build uncertainties in order to maintain its dominance. He looked at the state of exception that emerges in public law and in the political arena, and is the point where the uncertainty demanded by power is built. And then Irving Goffman's concept of total institution. This is a concept that's used in research to explain the oppressive power of political authority over the transformation of individuals. So what was the method that we used? So in this research, methodological pluralism was employed to explain and describe the rights violations that were experienced by these women who were imprisoned after the coup attempt and the transformation of their lives afterwards. So the field research was carried out between August 2022 to October of 2022. And it was conducted with 180 women who have been in prison for at least 6 months and at most 49 months after the coup attempt. With semi-structured interviews were conducted with 9 women with similar characteristics. 6 of the interviews were conducted online and 3 were face-to-face. Interviews lasted a minimum of 45 minutes and a maximum of 2 hours and 20 minutes. The survey consisted of 151 open-ended, closed-ended, and multiple-choice questions. Now, because the study was done online, as you can imagine, many people refused to participate, fearing, what would happen to them if they did, especially with the recently enacted censorship law. So that in itself just made the participants limited. So in looking at the participants here, looking at educational status, so the age ranges of participants, let me tell you that first. 71% of the participants had children. 17% of them had children ages 9 and under at the time of their imprisonment, and 8% of those with children remained in prison with their young children. Now, the participants who consisted of individuals with a high level of education underwent an investigation after July 15 and were accused of memberships in a terrorist organization. 73% of those participants are undergraduate, 11% were graduate, and 10% had associate degrees. So in the study, I mention again, there's two main things. First, looking at the rights violations that happen in prison, and second, the effects and transformations of the prison process on women. Personal impact and individual transformation, the impact on family and its transformation, and the sociological and financial effects as well. Here's one of the participants. She said, between 2009 and 2013, I was the director of a girls' high school dormitory. I resigned in 2013 and changed jobs and cities. In 2017, the prosecutor had me detained and arrested on the grounds of the dormitory dictatorate and the app on my phone called Bylock. So women's rights violations in detentions and their experience in detention gave a lot of information after the studies. Of course, participants were exposed to many ill treatment and violation of rights during their detention and in prison, and we have those testimonies. The participants first experienced rights violations during the detention and interrogation process. If it's possible to evaluate them under different headings, such as deprivation of legal and human rights and violence, we may do so. 80% of the participants were subject to psychological violence during detention and interrogation. 51% of them were exposed to a naked search. 52% of the participants stated that they were detained under harsh conditions in detention houses that accommodate people far above their capacity. 25% of them were starved in detention. One of the participants expressed this situation in the detention as follows. She said, during my 29 days of detention, I was stuck in a situation where there would be no place to sit. The detention center was flooded with sewer water several times. Since the toilets were not used, we were taken to other places for bathroom needs, and that's why we were asked to hold it for a long time. 32% of participants were threatened with an extension of their detention period. Now, although there were pregnant women among the participants at the time of their detention, they were detained and kept in harsh conditions as well. Different participants also provided information that when they were pregnant. I was detained when I was 7 months pregnant. Although the doctor did not want to give me the medical report to let me stay in detention, I was still detained after the threat of the prosecutor. With my 2 sons, one 4 and 6 years old, and when I was 8.5 months pregnant, we were locked in a 2 square meter cell that has only walls and no windows. So, although this study in particular included only 4 pregnant detainees, 80 pregnant and postpartum women were detained or arrested in Turkey in the last 6 years. When pregnant prisoners were taken to the hospital for treatment, they were handcuffed in airless and dark prison vehicles called coffins. They were not provided with full and timely health services, and they struggled to survive in prison, deprived of even the food needs for themselves and for their babies. So you might ask, how can the government justify this? Well, the government can easily justify what's done to these prisoners because prisons are the only places where power can justify itself on a moral ground. So when a citizen is detained or arrested, the government and society label them as criminal. After the labeling, in the eyes of the government and its extensions, detention centers and prisons cease to be places where the criminal is punished and turned into a tool of revenge. And here are some examples of what I just said. The detention was very difficult, she said. There was no cleaning for 10 days. I prayed with my hands cuffed. They did not give me anything to sleep on. Another woman. There were meal times where they did not deliver anything to eat. The tomato in the sandwich they gave was moldy. There was no cleaning at all. I asked for a broom so that I could clean the place where I was staying, but they didn't give me one. I was detained for 9 days. The female attendant came from time to time, and I had difficulty even meeting my bathroom needs. Although I had to consume 2 to 3 liters of water a day due to some health issues, only 200 milliliters of water was given to me each day. Even though I told them that I had money with me and that I needed to buy water, they didn't take it into consideration. In short, it was not an environment suitable for human conditions. So, I want to make a point that what has been done in the last 6 years to Hizmet supporters has been done to the Kurds for years, right? The unlawfulness that has been experienced has been concealed by individuals, by institutions, and by ruling powers. So the more the partners of a crime increase in number, the greater the likelihood of the crime being hidden and its severity. So there is such a complicity in condoning these crimes after July 15. Now, violations of women's rights in prison and prison experiences, I think I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker, but you can see 60% of the participants stated their political thoughts had changed after their experience. 12% stated that they changed their beliefs, and 42% no longer trust the government. The government has almost declared a war against the segments of society that it's turned hostile. And in this war, it uses all oppressive and ideological apparatuses of the state to its fullest. So I think I'm going to conclude. If you want to go to their conclusions, there we go. Psychological evidence obviously was apparent. Detention and overcrowding in prisons. Women threatened, especially by their families and children. The women were subjected to strip searches and starved. The arrest of both parents caused severe trauma in the lives of children. And I know that trauma had been mentioned before, and you all are going to hear from a trauma expert. And that is something that significantly came out of this study, is the psychological effects that happened for these women and the families that were torn apart based on their detention and imprisonment. You can go to the next slide. This kind of gives you a little bit of information about what I talked about before. The female prisoners with a high level of education, they experienced rights violations. Technology, they didn't have access to. Libraries, no access. Education, no access. So what did this study reveal? That's what we all want to know. So the study revealed these primary 2 things. Rights violations were experienced by women in prison. It's documented, but it's documented by the women on the ground in Turkey. Radical transformations took place in their lives after their release. Now, this study, what I'm going to be working on with it is looking at doing some policy work and writing reports. So it's very beneficial in that, even though the participants in the study was so small. But I hope that gives you an idea of some of the new things that are being done in regards to studies with women directly coming out of Turkish prisons. Thank you very much.